All right, everyone. So good morning and welcome to the SCAG Zero Emission Truck Infrastructure Study Technical Advisory Committee convening number 3. Very happy to have you all here with us this morning. We're very excited to share with you the progress that we've made and to hear from you, for you to share your insights and your thoughts and your questions with us. So speaking of questions, we're going to begin with one for you today. Before we get into introductions, or as we're getting into introductions. So please take a look at the screen. What are you hoping to get out of today's TAC meeting? Please provide a one-word answer in the chat. Thank you for doing that. While you're considering what it is that you're hoping to get out of today's TAC meeting, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jonathan Raspa, the SCAG project manager for this project. Jonathan.
Great, thanks, Lars. Good morning, everyone, and I want to thank you all again for taking the time to attend today's ZETI TAC meeting. We've got a lot to share, so let's just go ahead and get right into it. Next slide, please, Lars. So really quickly, I just want to reintroduce the consultant team that's working with SCAG on this. It's being led by Cambridge Systematics, and they're being supported by Chen Ryan and Associates, ICF, Red Hill Group, Tioga, and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. We've got a great team, and we've been really happy with their progress to date. Next slide. I also want to go in and thank every TAC member and their organizations for supporting this work. You're keeping SCAG engaged on your own zero emissions projects in progress, and coming to these meetings and providing feedback. And we really appreciate every round of engagement where you're all involved. We've also got one new TAC member this round, Metrans. So I'd like to welcome them to the TAC, and looking forward to their contributions as well. Next slide, please.
I'd like to interject here to let everyone know that this TAC meeting is being recorded. Back to you, Jonathan.
Yes. So if everyone, when you have a question or want to add a comment to the chat, please make sure you add your name and organization. It would just help us follow up on questions anytime they come up. If you want to ask a question, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, or you can add it to the chat. But we've got opportunities for questions and answers sort of throughout the presentation. But we do have a full agenda, so we've got a lot to cover, so I'll just go through that really quickly. We've already hit the welcome and introductions. We'll give you a brief update on project progress, and then Anurag and Ben from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab will go into a deeper data dive on the modeling work we've been doing. We've also got ICF's team here going over our approach to the siting criteria, which I'm sure you're all going to be pretty interested in. And we've got a couple of members of the TAC actually presenting their own experience developing and standing up charging sites through their own processes and sort of what they've experienced. We'll also have a round of engagement and feedback. There'll be some poll questions, and we just would open that up to Q&A, and then we'll let you know what the next steps are going to be before the next TAC meeting. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Sam Zanheimer from Cambridge Systematics to go over project progress to date. Sam?
Thank you so much, Jonathan. So yes, we've been making progress steadily throughout the months that we've been apart since our last TAC meeting. Next slide, Lars. So we are in TAC meeting 3. This is where we're going to be talking a little bit more about the refining of truck markets, travel patterns, the discussion about our modeling. So right on schedule. We're going to be, this is again, the last of the 4 that we'll be doing. So there are 6 in total. And we are right in schedule right now, right at the junction between phase 1 and 2. Lars, for the next slide. And just a brief recap of what we discussed as our next steps from TAC meeting 2. We have completed the surveys, focus groups, and interviews, and wrapped those into an engagement summary that will be shared at the end of the project. We are convening our 3rd of our 6 TAC meetings, so this is the 4th of our remaining. And these will go until, as you saw the previous schedule, till 2024, till June of 2024. Since our last meeting, we've been continuing to develop the heavy load model, which Ben will be discussing along with Anurag shortly, talking about the charging requirements and developing the future demand forecasts. And that should be completed in December this year and potentially bleeding over into January, but wrapped up pretty shortly. And then we got to finalize the framework and the workflow model for the implementation, again, by January of 2024. So again, these things will be coming very quickly. Next slide, Lars. And just to kind of go over the technical pieces that we completed in phase 1 and 2. So far, we completed the literature review. We've completed the truck survey, the focus groups, and we've held our first few technical advisory committee meetings. We completed the truck GPS data analysis, completed the truck expansion. We've identified market segments and incorporated payload information. So what we're going to talk about next is really focused on the next steps of this project and the introduction of the heavy load model and how that's going to work in progressing the data that we've already processed into a larger simulation. So next slide, Lars. So I'll take this opportunity to introduce Ben Wang, who's from Lawrence Berkeley Lab, as discussed by Jonathan. They run the heavy load model, and I'll turn it over to Ben to talk about the heavy load model and how it's going to be utilized throughout this process. Anurag Kamantori, our project manager, will be supporting that conversation and talking a bit more of how it integrates overall in the project and how it kind of bridges not only the modeling side, but the siting criteria. So I'll turn it over to you, Ben. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Jonathan. And hello, everyone. Good morning. Happy bagel time, coffee time. This is Ben Wang, research scientist from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Really happy here to talk about the heavy load effort involved in this analysis efforts in SCAG territory. Next slide, please. Yep. The heavy load is the acronym for medium and heavy duty electric vehicle infrastructure, load operation and deployment. It is essentially a software tool developed by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in collaboration with the California Energy Commission. The function, eventually, for this tool is to project the charging infrastructure needs across the state in terms of the quantity, type, and location. It was originally used for the AB 2127 analysis report, and now it's been augmented to support more efforts in the hydrogen side. How does this work? This tool work? This is a slide that shows the overall workflow of this tool. Maybe starting from the left-hand side as the inputs. We take advantage of the travel demand model we have access to from Caltrans, which is developed by the Cambridge Systematics. It is a statewide travel demand model for medium heavy-duty vehicles, as you can see on the screen. It shows how many trips are coming from some locations in the state as starting points to other locations as the trip destinations. And the second type of input is parking and infrastructure locations, which we call it candidate locations in the model. The tool is able to simulate the charging and the refueling demand over those critical locations. And we use the truck GPS location data to characterize the travel demand model and calibrate the parameters such as start time, trip duration, etc. Adoption scenario is another critical piece that we leveraged from a variety of stakeholders, which we'll talk about that later. Vehicle specifications include the battery capacity, charging, discharging efficiency, powertrain efficiency, etc., that describe the vehicle side parameters. Given all these inputs, the agent-based simulation within the tool is able to resolve the intraday activities for all these trips in the simulation. We can keep track of the driving, parking, and charging events for these vehicles throughout the day and aggregate the results at different geospatial resolutions. For instance, the pictures in this screen shows the charging quantity and the charging load profiles can be aggregated at the county level for the state. And also, if we zoom into the Fresno area, the results can also be aggregated at the traffic analysis zone level. Due to the agent-based nature, we can also see the quantified charging load and infrastructure needs at the site level, which are the truck stops and rest areas used in the simulation. leveraging another tool called Edge, developed by CEC, we can compare the new load, of the new EV charging load on top of the circuit base load, and compare it with the circuit capacity load, so that we can hopefully have some insights to show with utility companies where you want to further develop your infrastructure to support this EV adoption. And the infrastructure results and load profiles can also be presented in a way with different, managed scenarios. For instance, we have a baseline management applied to the charging sessions. We have also the managing rate scenarios where we can, we can see how the load profiles will look differently under different control and management scenarios. This is a high-level overview of the workflow. And by the way, this tool just won the 2023 R&D 100 award. So thanks to the great sponsor of this project, as well as a variety of great collaborators. Next slide, please. The heavy load effort has also been supported by the U.S. Department of Energy for the national scale analysis, including the infrastructure analysis, load profile analysis, as well as cost analysis at the national scale. We adapt the similar approach to derive the national scale travel demand models. And for each one of these origin and destination pair, we can compare the routes across the state. For example, those are example routes for the state of Illinois. Some of these routes are directly originating or ending at the state. Some of them are just passing through the state. So you can see it's a very complex problem. In order to analyze the electrification impact for a small region, you have actually need to look at a larger scale and then downscale the results to the region. On the right-hand side, we have simulated the depot charging load and the public in-route charging load intraday at different time of the day. So we can see, different peaking time and location over the map. Next slide, please. And similarly, we can aggregate the infrastructure results at different geographical resolutions. Here are the results preliminary for the depot chargers, results by county, and public in-route charging needs by county. We also tentatively leverage this approach to simulate the hydrogen refueling demand over the truck stops at the national scale, about 1,900 of them. So we can see the refueling demand we can see the refueling demand across the time. If we can have a little help clicking the lower right-hand side animation. Lower right-hand side animation. Yep. So we can see the demand is shifted a little bit from the East Coast, from the to the West Coast as the time progresses. We also investigate different managed charging scenarios for the charging sessions being simulated at the national scale. There are heuristics we leveraged to control the charging sessions by adding additional flexibilities and reducing their power during peak hours. There's also an optimization-based approach, which can look at the holistic schedule and determine the optimal set points for each charging session. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is another perspective of the model where we leverage the telematics from different sources. For instance, the ones from UC Riverside and West Virginia University to characterize the travel demand, as I mentioned earlier. Specifically, we want to the trip start time, trip distance, trip duration, parking duration. Those statistics match the realistic data set we obtained. Next slide. Yeah. How are we going to incorporate and leverage this existing work for the SCAG territory analysis? Here's what we proposed for this project. First, we want to leverage the existing adoption scenario we have access to from the California Energy Commission called AATE3. And this scenario will be used as a basis in this analysis. And we want to use it to characterize the trip volume in the simulation. In addition, we will want to develop additional parameters, additional knobs within this scenario to see how the sensitivity is regarding the adoption scenario. If we change some of these parameters, which Anurag will talk about them more in the later slides, if we change some of them, how the adoption trajectory will be different so that the trip volume and the charging behaviors can be simulated by heavy load so we can test drive different scenarios for the future. And the bottom-up simulation, can take advantage of these different scenarios and resolve them with greater temporal and geospatial resolutions. As you can tell on the right-hand side animation, the yellow network is the truck routes we extracted from the OpenStreetMap. The blue dots are the candidate locations, which include the truck stops, rest areas so far. There are additional efforts, which I'm going to mention in the next slide about these additional locations we're going to use. And the moving red dots are the vehicles being simulated from the scenario. As I said, this will offer a platform for us to test drive different scenarios and sensitivities about infrastructure and load profiles in the future, which offers great opportunities for us, to carefully design the charging network for the public charging network in the future. Next slide, please. Sorry, previous slide. Yeah. As I mentioned, additional two efforts in this project will be unprecedented. One is the inclusion of the tool-based travel demand models, which will cover multiple trips over multiple days for a given vehicle. Compared with the existing solution, each vehicle is represented by one trip, which is not very realistic. So the tool-based travel demand from Cambridge systematic teams will significantly improve the modeling fidelity on the transportation side. Additionally, CalSTAR and APRI team are offering additional location data for us to augment the candidate locations in this study. I noticed that ICF also has great work in this regard. So hopefully we can incorporate additional realistic location data in this study to augment analysis. Given all these improvements, we want to allow the intelligence at the vehicle level to decide when to charge, where to charge, which is critical for the public en-route infrastructure planning. And hopefully in this project, we can resolve this problem and bring more insights to the public. So very happy to be involved in this project. I will pass it along to Anurag, please.
Ben, thanks. I know it's a difficult topic for many of us in transportation to connect the dots, but you did a pretty good job helping us understand what the energy demands are. I'll just summarize all of the work that's going in and show how this leads into the work that my colleagues from ICF will present. But if you can go to the next slide, please, Lars. Again, as we start thinking about the scenario planning, I just wanted us to get back to what the scope of this effort is. When we start thinking about fueling options, it's either depot or overnight charging, en route public charging infrastructure, but there could be en route private charging infrastructure as well, and then hydrogen fueling, which we primarily think will happen en route. This study tries to help us focus on the need for public charging infrastructure, right? So it's a narrow band because we believe, or the scope of the study helps build a roadmap for all of us to start thinking about where those locations need to be. So if you go to the next slide, as we start thinking about the scenarios, and we are talking mostly about future years, right? And we'll come up with scenarios for 30, 35, 40, and I believe 50 about what the needs could look like. There are some global metrics that we need to think about. One is the horizon year. And then the second one is the range of selection between electric versus hydrogen. And then there are some travel behavior adoption rates, right? You could have different electrification rates or different zero emission rates by different market segments. And the market segments could be truck class size. It could be local versus interregional travel. It could be specifically looking at port trips. So how do you vary that rate of electrification? So you will have a few levers to test or to assess within the model. And then we also have to determine, as we saw the previous slide, what percentage of fleets may choose depot charging versus on-route charging. And to get at this, the survey results we presented in the previous TAC, along with some data that we have from the old California Vehicle Inventory Use Survey about fleet readiness. Large fleets were generally more ready than small fleets. And so that needs to translate into total number of trucks, which we generate from CalVIAS. And then the critical piece is when trucks start the day, what is the state of charge, right? So if you have depot charging, is it 100%? Or should we vary that even a little bit, because not all trucks may charge at 100%. So there's a lot of different variables through which the scenarios could be developed and tested in the heavy load model. And this is the work that we're going to focus on for the next month or so as we start building out all of the different pieces. Next slide, please. And again, I just want to take a second to reinforce, I think, the critical piece of where heavy load fits into the project. The scenario planning I just spoke about, but the critical piece is it ties travel demand with energy capacity. And we know that there is no right answer now or no single point answer of what the adoption rates could look like in the future. So running a few scenarios and capturing a range of energy needs under different adoption criteria. And then how does that influence the need for public charging and where, how much demand and where is the demand? So these are all the things that will be tested. And ultimately, we then drill down to a specific series of sites around areas where we think there is demand. Next slide. And then the critical pieces where this is actually pushing the work that Ben and his team have been doing into even more specificity is, as Ben mentioned, we go from truck travel to daily travel patterns for trucks, because that helps us to understand when trucks may run out of charge. So that's a critical differentiator. And then the modules that Ben mentioned, a primary focus for their effort has been on electric. In recent months, they've started building out the hydrogen component. And so we'll collaborate with them to push this forward as part of the SCAG effort. So for us, personally, as a data geek and a modeler at heart, these are exciting elements. And this actually shows collaborative nature of the way the state of California is operating, which is we are building on tools that have already been funded and supported rather than starting from scratch every single time. So the collaboration across different efforts also gives us both confidence as well as allows us to just focus on the needs of the specific project move. So that's sort of the first part of the presentation. We'll get into the second part of the technical scope in just a minute. But Sam, I know you and Lars had a break and some questions to talk here. Is that right?
Correct. We have an opportunity to answer a few questions that have come in. I see that Ian McMillan had a question about the timescale. Ben did answer that within the chats, but the question of what was the timescale for the animation that we saw, and Ben's answer was the animation's at a 10-minute timescale. So the changing of those dots, or as the scaling of those dots would go, those are done over a 10-minute time lapse. We also had a question from Lars, from Matt Miyazoto. Sorry if I mispronounced that. How you decide hydrogen station locations, capacity, and number of a number for modeling. And he said, Honor Hug, you're answering that as we talk. So I believe that's answered. But if there's any follow-up, Matt, if you want to come off mute and ask that question right now, that'd be great. Or Ian, if you have any additional questions, or if others on the TAC have any additional questions, please use the hand raise function, and then you can come off of mute and we can answer those questions. Wonderful. Ian, if you want to come off of mute.
Yeah, no, this is really great work. I'm really excited to see it and it continuing to develop. I just wanted to make sure on the time scale, the animation I was asking about was the hydrogen animation, because there's the two animations. There's the other one that was showing sort of the trucks moving. Was the hydrogen also at 10-minute interval?
Yes, the animation is done at 10-minute interval. However, the data used for the animation is actually the events logged in the simulation. It's at 1 minute level, and we simulate consecutive 3 days and pick the second day out as a typical day scenario.
Great, super, thanks.
I see there's another question that came in on the chat. See if you want to come off of mute and ask the question, or if you'd like me to read it.
Yeah, I can come off the mute. Hi, Ben. Yeah, Ben and I work together on the heavy load hydrogen piece of it. So it's a question that we've discussed, I believe, at our last meeting, but we were talking about, what are the benefits or, drawbacks of actually including existing and planned depot charging stations and public hydrogen refueling stations in the heavy load model. Ben, if you recall, I think Mike Nicholas said something about it creating restrictions on the model. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there to discuss it, because since I don't do any modeling, to me, it's like, I'm just trying to understand, the benefits or drawbacks of putting what we know into the model versus just letting it kind of run. So, thanks.
So, yeah, that's a great question, Christy. Let me tackle it first and others can chime in. It's a philosophical question that Sam Ponazeri and I were chatting a couple of last week, and then we even spoke about it late at night, because we are slightly, it's actually dependent on how we want to approach the technical piece. I don't think we're final yet, but here is the way we are approaching it now. It may be changed, and that's why there are incremental approaches to these TAC, right? Which is when the way we want to do heavy load, and then we'll talk a little bit about the site-specific locations, is the heavy load, by providing input for either existing locations or a range of locations where we think charging is needed. We're just identifying areas and geographies where we believe there is a need for public charging infrastructure. Our goal is to not identify specific winners or losers. So as long as the state, so we're doing 2 studies, right? One at a state level with CEC, and then this specific SCAG effort, and they'll follow similar principles, I think. So there's a lot of discussions to be had. But we will, if the entire state is roughly covered by the right number of locations where we think charging will be needed, then BIN's model helps us identify the demand of those specific locations or those geographies, right? General geography, not specific locations, but the general geographies where these sites are situated. Then when we go into the siting criteria, we can actually look down to see, well, what are the parcels that are specifically available that could be used for charging? And once we do this next part of the presentation, I hope there'll be a bit more clarity around this. But the goal is to build a tool or a series of tools on how to prioritize rather than choose a specific winner or loser, because there is also a time horizon to this, right? So even if we choose what the land use today is and base our selection criteria based on that, things could change between now and 2040. The land uses could be repurposed. Development could change, the needs could change, utilities may have a different capital investment plan. So how do we start prioritizing all of these and give the agencies a tool is the way we're thinking about it. But we may change the way we think based on how the discussions with ICF, LBNL, and also with EPRI and CalSTAT on the statewide study go. And SCAG, of course, is a key part of this. So that's actually a philosophical discussion that we're going to have over the next week, 2 weeks. This is what we do for Christmas. We really enjoy having conversations about heavy load truck charging.
That was really well thought out, and I appreciate that answer. That'll make me think over Christmas a little bit too. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks a lot.
I see there's some continued conversation about charging locations and potentially openness to public and private in terms of depot charging. I think we'll be able to answer some of those questions and talk about that more as we go through the siting criteria, as well as our presentations from our two TAC members in the industry. So thank you so much, Patrick. And with that, I think we should move on to the siting criteria. Anurag, if you want to take that away.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I can get started and then I'll pass it to Theodora from ICF. But really quickly, there is a connection between all of the modeling that we spoke about, which helps us identify the energy needs based on the travel demands in general areas, right? As I just mentioned to Christy. And then how do we then start thinking about the specific locations in that general area that may be potential candidates for public charging infrastructure? So there is connection between the top, it's called the bottom-up simulation, but it still gives us some pretty large geographic areas. And how do we get into the site-specific assessments? And I'll let, and ICF have done a lot of thinking around this. They also presented similar work efforts with SANDAC. So here's another opportunity to collaborate and build on the work that they have done for other agencies in California. So Theodora, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Anurag. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this slide shows the overall process of the siting analysis, which is a multi-criteria decision-making approach. And one of its key benefits is the provision of a structured approach, allowing stakeholders, including you, to contribute their insights towards each step. The analysis begins by reviewing the literature and gathering stakeholder input in order to define the siting criteria groups to consider, as well as sub-criteria. After collecting and processing data, the next step involves prioritizing the criteria based on stakeholder preferences. And these steps lead to the development of this practical tool that we were talking about, or an approach that combines the previously identified criteria, assigns weights to criteria based on importance, and calculates overall scores for potential refueling locations. To achieve all this, we will closely work with SCAG to refine our approach and deliver a comprehensive siting methodology that meets the needs of the region. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's start by discussing the first step of our analysis. So what makes a site suitable for charging and hydrogen infrastructure? We've nailed it down to 5 essential groups. 5 essential criteria groups. First, we need to ensure that the station is well utilized for optimal financial viability and to cater to the needs of trucks. Land considerations can also next, ensuring that we have space for truck parking and charging. We also need to consider the impact of such initiatives on local communities, aiming for a positive influence from infrastructure deployment. Next, adequate power supply is non-negotiable for meeting the charging needs of trucks. And we also need to consider potential environmental conditions that could impact construction or operations of a charging or hydrogen fueling station. We will further examine these criteria in the next slides, and we also hope to receive feedback from you regarding any additional criteria to consider and their importance. Next slide, please. So the first group of criteria is utilization, and this generally refers to the demand for charging or hydrogen fueling. So this can be an indication of the station's financial viability. For instance, low utilization can lead to poor return on investment and affect the station's economic viability. To optimize the utilization of the charging and fueling site locations, one needs to understand how many trucks pass by a potential site, how many trucks need charging, and if they stop long enough to charge. And to quantify these, we will leverage insights from BIN's examination of truck travel patterns as presented in the previous slides. Let's go to the next slide. Thanks. The second criterion is land, and this includes several sub-criteria. First, we need to identify sites with adequate space to accommodate the charging equipment, cables, and user access. Trucks will need to be parked while they are charging, so the charging and fueling infrastructure must include adequate parking spaces, which will depend on the expected demand. Next, as the number of zero-emission trucks grows, the demand for infrastructure is likely to increase. So siting refueling infrastructure on a piece of land that allows for future expansion will help ensure that the infrastructure will remain relevant and functional as the demand grows. It is also important to consider land use and zoning criteria when selecting potential sites. For example, sites zoned industrial may typically be ideal, and while commercial zoning may accommodate charging or hydrogen fueling, it may not allow truck parking, for example. Another criterion is the cost of land acquisition. So when citing zero-emission vehicle infrastructure, locations with lower land acquisition costs or sites that may offer potential public-private partnership opportunities may be prioritized as they provide a higher return on investment opportunity for private investors and developers. Other sub-criteria may include ensuring easy access without significant detours for trucks, or the existence of essential amenities for truck drivers, such as restrooms or convenience services. And also the proximity to other infrastructure or hydrogen supply chain is also important because this way we would balance the distribution and spacing of charging or fueling stations, avoiding over-concentration. And we can also ensure economic viability and lower delivery costs. Let's move on to the next slide. The concept of equity in siting emphasizes the fair distribution of charging and fueling infrastructure. So on one hand, we want to strategically locate charging and hydrogen fueling infrastructure and increase the proportion of zero-emission trucks operating in disadvantaged communities. On the other hand, there may be community concerns about increased truck traffic and different congestion impacts from these deployments. And we want to strategically locate infrastructure and ensure that disadvantaged communities have direct benefits from such initiatives, meaning a net positive enhancement to quality of life and environmental justice due to the adoption of zero-emission trucks. The state has developed different mapping tools that could be used to identify these communities and their characteristics. Also, by knowing, for example, the number of trips and how far they travel in the community, we can also calculate things like emissions reductions or any congestion issues resulting from infrastructure deployment. Next slide, please. Both electric and hydrogen fueling infrastructure are dependent on the capacity of the local power grid. Siting criteria for grid capacity involve assessing the existing electrical infrastructure and its ability to support the additional demand created by refueling stations. Close coordination with the utility providers would be important to confirm power availability and identify grid infrastructure investments that may be needed to support charging or hydrogen fueling station development. Additionally, integrating distributed energy resources into the station development is also recommended. These can operate connected to the grid in parallel with it and or as standalone systems. So they offer benefits like resilience and grid support. And integration considerations could include a site's capacity for distributed energy resources and special requirements for technologies like solar panels or battery energy storage systems. Next slide, please. The fifth and final criterion is environmental, and this considers potential environmental conditions that could impact construction or operations of a charging hydrogen fueling station. On the station development side, we also need to consider the conditions of the site, such as flood risk, land cover, and soil contamination, but also account for environmental laws mandating assessments for new projects. Next slide, please. At this point, we need to establish a clear definition of the geographical units that will define the level of our analysis. Anurag talked about it a little bit in the previous slides. So we will begin the siting analysis at the census block group level. Block groups are used by the US Census Bureau and our statistical divisions of the census tract. Each census block group will undergo an initial scoring process, focusing on utilization, equity, and relevant land criteria that are mainly available at the census block group level. After determining the short list of census block groups, we will then conduct a parcel level analysis to identify candidate parcels that can be prioritized based on criteria that are more relevant at a parcel level. And a parcel is basically a piece or unit of land defined by a series of measured straight or curved lines that connect to form a polygon, as you can see in one of these pictures. These high priority parcels will be used to present tangible real-world examples of site typologies that are not just abstract concepts, but concrete cases that demonstrate the applicability of our siting criteria. Next slide, please. If you recollect, the second main step of the siting analysis is the prioritization of the criteria. In this slide, we present a few more details regarding the weighting of the criteria. So the weighting method identified thus far involves an approach to gather stakeholder input. This would be essential to ensure that we have a comprehensive, transparent, and adaptable decision-making process that reflects different perspectives. So initially, a short survey can be developed and distributed to stakeholders, including you, allowing them to prioritize predefined criteria groups. Stakeholders would then assign weights to criteria groups as well as to sub-criteria within each group. And to provide granularity, stakeholders may also rate certain location features for each sub-criterion relative to others. Examples of these features could include, for example, whether a specific site is better suited for overnight charging versus opportunity charging, for example. Next slide, please. So the third and final step is to combine everything, to combine the criteria and the weights and develop the approach for site evaluation, which will calculate these overall scores for potential refueling locations. And it is important to repeat at this point that our objective is not to select a site for immediate development. Our siting process will mainly serve as a tool for planners and developers to tailor the site selection process according to their priorities, such as, for example, we have some examples here: cost effectiveness, demand coverage, or equity and community benefits. And as Anurag mentioned before, it's important to highlight that there is this dynamic nature of certain data, such as potential shifts in land ownership or availability of parcels over time. And to effectively account for these, we will need periodic reviews and updates to the data sets and the tool. Now, to illustrate how the tool would look like, we show an example here from a separate project where ICF developed an EV charging infrastructure toolkit for the city of Moreno Valley. This map shows a scoring system used to identify which areas, which parcels in the city have the greatest need for EV charging, broken down into 3 separate scoring scenarios or priorities. And so in that project, the breakdown into these scenarios guides selection by first prioritizing level 2 charging for extending parking and higher income areas. So this is scenario 1, or by examining DC fast charging in locations with longer trips and shorter dwell times. And the third scenario is highlighting equity by focusing on disadvantaged community drivers. So the user can choose a scenario, and the map or the tool then displays high priority locations specific to the selected scenario. And yeah, this provides a glimpse into what we aim to achieve for the SCAG region as well, focusing on zero emission trucks. And now that we have explored our approach and tools, I'd like to open the floor for any questions or comments. Please feel free to share your thoughts on any aspect we've discussed.
It appears that we had a question from Marcus Alexander regarding grid capacity and how it's determined, and your colleague, Theodora Sam, has answered that question. I don't know if you would like to add anything to that, or if that is sufficient in and of itself.
Let me check the answer. I wasn't able to check my chat.
So Sam writes, oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was reading the answer. I think that covers everything. But yeah, we will definitely need also utility data, and in order to assess grid capacity, generally, ideally, we would like, for example, data like the locations of substations and their characteristics, like the capacity.
Right, terrific. We have another question, this time from Ian McMillan. Do you plan to publish a map for the whole SCAG region where IOU data is available?
Generally, based on my past experience, utility data should not be publicly, available. Of course, so we will not be showing anything regarding this utility data directly in the map. But I think the main outcome would be this tool that will have that will depict these different the candidate locations, the candidate parcels that the tool suggests based on different user-defined scenarios.
And maybe I can add to that, Ian. So eventually the tool itself, depending on how you put the weights for different criteria, gonna create that heat map that's similar to what we're showing right now on this slide. So, and that heat map is going to vary depending on how you weight different criteria. So like we had 5 group as a criteria. If someone want to say, the only thing that matters to me is really the utilization, and I want to maximize utilization as compared to equity, or as compared to like how the CEQA NEPA going to work for that, or other criteria. Some criteria are definitely needed. Are more of a Boolean criteria. If you don't have a space, regardless of like how much truck travel there, you can't really build a charging infrastructure. So those will be there. But for those that are not Boolean and are more like you can put a weight, you can get different heat maps. So the tool itself is going to be something that we're building as part of this, but then how the stakeholders are going to be using it is going to be different depending on, I mean, what sort of weight and how much do you want to put the priority behind each of those criteria.
Right.
And then with respect to the IOU data, so the nice things about, like, living in California is that, we have all the IOUs, they have to publish their integration capacity analysis maps, and those should be publicly available. So especially for SCAG region, we do have access to this SoCal Edison data. LIDWP, as I mentioned in my response to Marcus and other, co-ops or municipality, utilities, we have to work with them individually to get access to those data. But for IOUs like SoCal Edison, such data is publicly available, so should be able to definitely use that.
Yeah, my past experience was in Indiana, so they were very all this is very confidential. Yeah.
Can I follow up really quick on that? Appreciate it. Thanks for the responses. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand it. So that this tool, is this tool designed, like, is this statewide? Is it SCAG region? And then another follow-up question is, do you have I guess I have two more follow-ups. Do you have an anticipated timeline when this tool would potentially be available? And then on that kind of related point, things will change relatively quickly as new stations come along and grid capacity changes, and sort of what's the frequency of potentially updating if that's considered as part of this? Thanks.
So the tool is going to be, we're going to work on the tool for this project for the SCAG region right now. So it's not going to be statewide. Similar to what you're seeing in on the slide, it's going to be a web tool. So it's going to have a web dashboard that you can go on the web and play around with the tool. And regarding the updating the tool, that's a great question. We are going to build it based on today's data, but if in the future funding is available and other things, we can definitely update the tool with new data. Because as you said, a lot of things is going to change. Like every 3 months, ICA maps get updated, or more frequently sometimes, or land use changes, and a lot of other factors are changing, like the build out of the infrastructure is changing. So some of those underlying data within the tool are going to change over time. So keeping the tool updated is important. But at this point, we're thinking about the data we have today.
Yeah, it's not part of the scope in a short answer. We will help build this, but it's up to, we'll have to work with SCAG to figure out how best to keep maintaining it. But I agree, a lot of things will change. And that's the challenge with this rapidly changing, with the study, because even some of the literature review we did at the beginning of the study is no longer valid, or so much more has been added to the literature and examples as well. So it's a pretty rapidly developing field. Sam, is a nice transition to our tax speakers talking about how the world is changing.
Yeah, and I see Steve Smith's comment out in the chat. Steve, we can talk about that when we do our full wrap up at the end, so we won't forget that question. I think the whole point of this project is to help with developing that infrastructure and helping localities be competitive for grant funding, and helping people channelize that grant funding into really good places, and working with SCAG on that. But we'll talk a little bit more about that at the tail end of this. As Anurag was talking about, we do have 2 presentations from members of the tech in our industry. And so it would be great to transition to that. Lars, if you could move to the next slide.
You bet. Okay, everyone. So thank you for those presentations, and I'm very pleased to be able to present 2 guest speakers today. One is a member of our TAC, Mr. Tony Zamora of Travel Centers of America, and the other is Patrick Cruz of Forum Mobility. So we're going to begin with Mr. Tony Zamora, who will be presenting on his experience and Travel Centers of America's experiences with developing a charging site. I think at this point, Tony will be taking control over the screen and will be sharing his slides.
Yes.
With that, take it away, Tony.
Can you hear me okay? First of all, clear?
Yes.
It's a high risk maneuver, right? I'm calling from a cubicle in Cleveland, and I'm going to share my screen. Anyway, let me know if you have see any glitches. I'm Tony Zamora. I'm with Travel Centers of America. Let me share. I am the project manager of. There's the button. Sorry. I'm project manager for. Sorry, you're seeing the agenda for my meeting today, including the white elephant gifts. Okay, if I put it in this mode, can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Again, Tony Zamora, Travel Centers of America, which since May of this year is now part of BP. So I am a BP employee. And what I'm going to share today is kind of a quick overview of our project, truck charging station project in Ontario, California, and some lessons learned that we have specific to this. So I want to set a message or expectations that I'm not going to be expounding largely on strategy or where we think electric trucks are going. These are particular and kind of in the trenches lessons learned from our project. So first of all, a word on Travel Centers of America. It began in 1972 in New Jersey, I believe. We now have 300 sites across the country. And the map on the bottom, I just want to call out, I really appreciated Theodora's review and the whole analytics around that. The nice thing for us as an operator of truck stops, all of those dots that you see on the map in the lower part of the screen here, those are all strategically located on the high priority freight corridors of the country, right? So that's we're kind of pre-selected for where we're going to put chargers, and including the kind of key priority corridors that we see as I-95 on the East Coast, I-10 on the South, and I-5 along the West Coast. So TA operates, you've probably seen us on highways. We have 3 brands, TA, Petro, and TA Express. We sell fuel, liquid fuels, diesel and gasoline. We have restaurants, full service restaurants and quick serve restaurants. We also have truck maintenance and repair shops, travel stores, which are like a convenience store. Plus, you can buy electronics and for trucks and CBs and everything for kind of targeted at truck drivers, but also any highway traveler. And our amenities range from showers, laundry facilities, small movie theaters at most sites, dog parks, a bowling alley we have somewhere, some casinos in some locations. So a wide range of amenities we have there. And also we provide parking. So the photo in the upper part of the screen there is a typical site. And I'm sorry, I cannot remember where this particular location is. But it's typical of a TA site. It's we average 26 acres a site at our locations, with hundreds of parking spaces available for trucks and trailers. The building in the front, of course, that has all of the things. We also have a forecourt that we which is in the very bottom of the page. That's where we're selling fuels also for cars. And I should also say we have some initial few EV car charging or charging for light duty vehicles, but through our sister company, BP Pulse, we are also planning to begin building out those at TA sites beginning next year with don't quote me on the number. I can't remember how many we're going to build next year, but it ramps up. Those are for charging stations for light duty vehicles. And I want to say, since I've been with TA just since November of last year, in May, we are now part of BP. BP brings a lot of resources with us, including BP Pulse. So here are just some messy graphics about our location, right? So Ontario, of course, the map on the right shows we're right at the intersection of the I-10 and I-15 highways. And I also note that within 100 miles of the TA Ontario site is another TA site. So we have the TA Coachella to the southeast along I-10 as you're heading out of town. And then we have the TA Wheeler Ridge to the northwest. That's just north of the Grapevine. And we are planning to build truck charging stations there as well. We have in California, Southern California, we have 7 total TA locations. And then the aerial photo in the middle, you can't really see, but just a note here, it's as large. This particular site, I think, is 31 acres, has parking for 300 trucks, I believe. That's trucks and trailers. This building here, if you can see my cursor, is where the restaurant and all the amenities, and then the service station is back here. Fuel dispensing, this is the diesel dispensing over here, all on the east side of the site. And way out on the west, in the southwest corner of the site, is where we're building the truck charging station. And let's see. So this is a drawing to the left side of the screen. This is what we'll be installing. We're going to install 2 400 kilowatt dual port chargers. And then we are building the capacity, including the cabling, so we can come back and plug in 2 additional 400 kilowatt chargers. So there'll be a 4, but in phase 1 for next year, we're just building 2. And then we have a megawatt charger planned in this spot right here. That'll be added in early 25. I'll go over the schedule on the next slide. So that is, that's charging for, 4 simultaneous charging here. These are dual port chargers. And then the megawatt charger here. And then we'll be generating electricity with a 250 kilowatt solar canopy. And then we have a 1 megawatt hour battery energy storage system. Yeah, I guess that's about that. Some details on the project itself. First of all, just to call out partners, there's a collection of logos there, but our key partner, of course, is the California Energy Commission, for which we have a grant through the EPIC program for $4 million. The CEC is also providing an additional $1 million via EPRI, via the e-truck program, if you're familiar with that. And so collectively with our partners, these are our kind of key goals, honed down to a few. First of all, under goals, we want to support our fleet customers that are beginning to transition and are thinking about transitioning to zero emission vehicles and battery electric trucks. Also, this site is a research and development site for us, right? So we've learned a lot, and we will be learning a lot through next year during construction. And then in operating it, we'll be learning a lot. And in particular, we're excited to be installing what I think maybe, they tell me at EPRI, my friends at EPRI tell me we may have one of the first megawatt chargers operating at a public site in 2025. In addition, we support local workforce development for electric truck service. We have technicians that will be trained on our on electric trucks. We also, you know, the key I think that we all want to learn is there a business case for public access charging for heavy duty electric trucks, right? You know, the economics of charging today's current generation of electric trucks, better electric trucks, it makes most sense for you know, short range and, you know, low and slow charging overnight is probably most economical. However, if you are a fleet operator that needs to go longer than 200 miles, even just regionally, even if you're returning to the depot and you need a charge to get you back to home base at the end of the night, we think that that is our niche, and that is our critical, and it's a critical niche to enable and extend the range of charging. So that means fast charging. And last but not least on our goals, just identify and share learnings throughout the project lifecycle, you know, in forums such as this. Looking at the schedule on the bottom, there's a lot of details here, but I just want to say that, you know, we'll be charging our first customers in December of 2024. We have been throughout this past year, continuing engineering development and also permitting. We submitted initial permitting designs to the City of Ontario and also working with SCAG-ZETI throughout this past year. Just last week, we've placed orders for our first long lead equipment. The first and most critical orders were placed for switchgear, as well as the battery energy storage system, as well as the solar panels. But procurement, yeah, well, I'll touch on that on the next slide, I guess. We start construction or groundbreaking in May of next year, and also the timeline on the bottom, I just want to note, goes through December 25, because that is really from the CEC's perspective. Our project is to build this thing and then operate it for at least a year and see what we're learning from it. Check the performance of the equipment and the economics and commercial data around it. So that's why we think of it. We'll be continuing, but we think of it as a program that continues for a year of operation. So really quickly, I know I just have a few minutes, but hopefully some time for a quick couple of Q&As. More time and more money. Some of these are going to be obvious, right? But just our learnings are, when we submitted the application for our CEC grant in, I think it was December of 2019, we saw a combined with the E-Truck program, like a $6 million price tag, and we're looking, it's more than that now. So we have additional investment from BP. The supply chain for things like switchgear, certainly have increased over the last 4 years from what we originally had planned. But the other thing to note is the installation cost, because apparently there was a study, a colleague at BP told me that a study on the 710 corridor showed that it's actually installation costs that had risen the most. And that's kind of about the labor market. Engaging local utility or in no particular order of critical lessons learned, right? But SCAG-ZETI has been a good partner for us. Understanding that they're a very large organization with Byzantine rules. They've been guiding us through those from Rule 23, Rule 29, charge ready programs. What applies, what doesn't apply, and so we continue to work with them, and that was needed really as soon as we could. Engaging a competent engineering, procurement, and construction contractor early. TA constructs a lot of things. We have a construction department. We build whole travel centers. And yet we did not have the internal expertise to do this, right? We needed to find, and we were looking for a bit of turnkey EPC contractor that would do the whole thing from the design through construction and startup. And we found that in core states, and we had a competitive bid, and we looked at a couple of 3 strong candidates. But I just, lessons learned is, as you're shopping for a contractor to build it for you, make sure that they have the experience and can back that up with previous similar projects. Procuring long lead items, I touched on that a bit. I'll just add, we had estimates for switchgear, for example, from switchgear and the microgrid controls that kind of integrate that, but we had estimates from anywhere from 50 to 70 weeks from order to delivery. We found a vendor able to deliver that in 35 weeks for us. And so that's critical, of course. Designed to fit your business. I just want to note that, we are not, our traditional customer, right, is a long haul transport fleet customer, right? We may not be looking at long haul battery trucks today, but also we are not a depot. We are not going to set up as, my friend from Foreign Mobility is going to show, we are not going to be setting up overnight yards for overnight charging, right? Our sites need to be designed for the customers that we more traditionally look at. And so what that means is, a lot of thought, a lot of hand wringing, frankly, went into just the configuration of how the site is going to be. They need to be pulled through lanes. The trailer needs to remain attached to the tractor. A lot of those things. We have to minimize the amount of parking spaces that we're taking out. We had initial plans for more solar arrays, as you see kind of typical in parking lots, but every post, right, takes out a parking space, and parking spaces are critical because we can't sell a customer anything else unless they can park there overnight. So that was a key learning, is that, our design for the charging station needs to fit what our business is. And public-private partnership, I really don't have enough time to cover all that can be said on that, but not always easy. And really that's not a reflection on anything other than it's new to us, right? So traditionally, certainly from BP's standpoint, BP typically doesn't need to borrow money for a large capital project, right? Let alone seeking public grants for it. So understanding what the CEC needs, understanding what EPRI and needs, the contracting, the machinations of just understanding their processes and overlaying them with our own somewhat Byzantine, requirements. All of that is a learning, and this cannot happen with public funding as we've had. It really is critical to start up this incipient business. And yet we've recognized we need to invest the time and the people into being good partners with our public partners. We need to understand them and appreciate where they're coming from. So with that, a little bit over 15 minutes, but Lars, do we have just a couple of minutes for Q&A? Or?
Hey, Tony, thank you so much. I'll deal with that. I know that there's a question in there from Chrissy about the location of it, if it's next to the Shell medium heavy duty station. At this time, Tony, if you could give control over to Lars, he'll make that transition to our next presenter. But if you could answer the question regarding the location, if it's next to the Shell medium heavy duty H2 station. You know that.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, indeed. That is also at our location. So Right across the street on Milliken Avenue, that's a Petro station. So that is also a TA site. And yes, it has a hydrogen fueling station there that's supplied by BP.
Hey, Tony.
Okay, thank you.
Tony, did you also mention that the most engaged TAC member gets a free site visit to the Ontario site? Was that the award?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Okay.
Yes. Well, and I'll Anurag, I'll even, well, maybe not referring to yourself, but whoever that is, I'll buy you a pork chop as well. Or any of our delicious offerings at the restaurant.
We appreciate the presentation, and let's go through the second one, and then maybe we can take questions for both of the TAC. We appreciate everybody contributing your own perspective of this. Patrick.
All right, sounds good, and great presentation, Tony. Just want to say thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys. I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of this committee. I think it's really important work that we're doing. So my name is Patrick Cruz. I'm a Senior Development Associate with Forum Mobility, and we are building charging stations for heavy-duty trucks. Before I get started, I just want to caveat, Tony kind of mentioned this, but our company is really focused on a pretty specific use case, and that's short-haul regional trips. So these are your trucks that are staying local, putting in between 50 to 150 miles per day on their vehicle, and not driving across the country or out of state really. We were very purposeful in deciding to focus on this market segment, and it was really informed by the current technological limitations of EV trucks and chargers. So your average EV truck out on the market today is getting about 150 to 200 miles of range, and it takes about 4 to 6 hours for a full dwell charge, and 45 minutes to an hour for an opportunity or top-off charge. We're really eager and excited and looking forward to technological advances like megawatt charging and trucks with ranges that are more commensurate with diesel trucks. But we don't really see those taking shape until kind of the end of the decade here. So we're focusing on the technology that's on the market today and designing our depots accordingly to serve those trucks that are going to be making the first foray into this transition. So with that being said, let me tell you a little bit about Forum on this next slide here. So we're building a network of charging stations in and around the ports of Northern California and Southern California, as well as the areas that trucks accessing those ports service. So NorCal, that's the Port of Oakland, out into Tracy, Stockton, French Camp area. And in SoCal, as you can expect, that's the Port of LA, Long Beach, out throughout the South Bay and into the Inland Empire. So our depots are going to be serving medium duty and heavy duty trucks for independent operators and fleets alike, but we're particularly focused on intermodal drayage operators because we know that those are the folks that are going to be making the transition first because they're going to be required to by regulations like advanced clean fleets and the like. At some point, I think we'll be building a network of charging stations to service long haul truck routes. But based off of our customer feedback, there's not a whole lot of long-haul truck drivers that are really even close, candidly, to making that transition right now. Maybe we're just not talking to the right people, but that's kind of what we're hearing. So on this next slide here, I mentioned that we're building depots. And what I mean by that is what you see on the right hand of your screen. Different folks call these things different things. Some people call them mobility hubs, others call them charging stations, but essentially what it is a lot of trucks, a lot of chargers, multiple companies, logistics carriers in one spot. And that kind of differs from what I'll call behind the fence charging, which typically involves the installation of chargers at warehouses and truck yards. With behind the fence charging, you'll typically see only a handful of chargers serving, as it can be one company or trucks that are accessing that warehouse. And it's really great because it involves charging stations. It involves installing charging stations at the location where trucks are headed. But it also involves downtime via charging at a pretty inopportune time in the drive cycle. And then developmentally speaking, you need to make sure that your existing warehouse or truck yard has the space to accommodate those chargers and has the power to accommodate that. And it can also be more costly because you can't take advantage of the economies of scale that you see with larger depots. So by way of example, every charger needs a switchgear and transformer, and you get a whole lot more bang for your buck when you're buying a switchgear and transformer for 100 trucks rather than 5 trucks. So on this next slide here, operationally speaking, we're offering 2 main products, charging as a service and a truck lease. So charging as a service, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with it. It's exactly what it sounds like. We offer a dedicated charging space on a long-term contract. Our depots will be open 24/7, 365, and will be staffed with a depot attendant for assistance and security. And then, I'll say we'd love to make our depots fully public, where you can just pull up, no contract, no existing contract, pay with a fuel card or a charging card, and plug in. But at this stage in the transition, we really need to have a relationship with our customers so that we can manage demand, know who's coming in and out of our depots, be able to help them, give them guidance, those types of things, and hence the need to have a long-term contract. The other product that we offer is a truck lease. That's where we'll go out, purchase an electric truck, take care of getting all the subsidies for the driver, and then pair that truck with the forum depot. And we really love this product because it speaks to the equity component of the position. Folks, there's going to be a lot of folks who are going with fleets that are going to be well capitalized and can make the capital expenditures to go out and buy a fancy, expensive new electric truck. But the truck lease really is focused on the mom and pop operators who can't necessarily make that big financial commitment right away. And it's a way of making sure that they don't get left behind as regulations prohibit them from driving their existing vehicles. So on this next slide here, I've got a typical layout. And I mentioned that our depots are pretty responsive to the short haul use case. And you can really see that here in this layout. Because we envision that our depots are going to primarily be serving local day cabs at the onset, our depots are pretty much going to have a 50-50 split between bobtail chargers, or chargers for bobtails, which are without trailers, and auto parking spaces, as well as a few pull-through chargers for opportunity charging. So this is basically focused on the drivers who wake up in the morning at their house, head to the depot to pick up their truck, run their routes, and then leave their truck overnight to charge. You'll commonly see fencing, transmission lines, nighttime lighting, electrical equipment, and then we include a command center and driver's lounge for the staff attendant, as well as for drivers to hang out while they're doing that 45-minute to an hour opportunity charge. So on the next slide here, when it comes down to where depots are located, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward formula. You need to be in existing industrial areas, proximate to freeways and truck routes, jurisdictions with a straightforward permitting pathway, and then critically, of course, no-brainer, power. And we need a lot of power. So I've kind of got a funny slide on this next one here. The average EV charging station that we're looking at is using about 5 to 10 megawatts of power. And that's about the same as your average NFL stadium. It just kind of shows how much power these stations are taking up. And of course, I'm a Packers fan, so I had to go with Lambeau here. But then on this next slide here, I'm giving away the secret sauce a bit here, but this is the general flow chart for how we determine if there's power on a site. So we start by looking at market data, customer feedback to identify areas of interest. And then we consult publicly accessible capacity maps to get a general indication of what is on the grid. Then we'll submit an engineering analysis report from the utility, go through the utility contract process, and that culminates in power being secured. So on this next slide here, I talk about publicly accessible capacity maps, and these are really important. It's one of the first things that we do. So here's an example of what these look like. On the left-hand side, you've got SoCal Edison's Distributed Resources Plan External Portal, which that's a mouthful, so we just affectionately call it Dr. PEP. And it gives you a pretty good idea of what's available on a circuit. And then on the right, I've just kind of taken that data and exported it into a KMZ and put it onto Google Earth, so you can get a better feel for this. And this image here is particularly in South Fontana in the Southwest Industrial Park area. Now, the thing I'll caveat here is these maps are rough ideas, and they also don't take into account other factors that are going on, as well as if somebody's already secured a utility contract and locked up all of the power on a circuit. Again, you can see here 6 megawatts, 5.7 megawatts. And if one charging station's coming up, they can really take up all of the power on a circuit. And that's why a utility analysis is so important. If I could wave a magic wand and make one thing happen, it would be that each utility had these maps publicly accessible with regularly updated data, because they're so important in our early discussions on where to site our projects. So moving on to permitting here on this next slide, it's surprisingly more difficult to permit an EV charging station than one might expect. The California legislature has passed legislation to help with this, but given the novelty of the use, there's still some education to be had. Nonetheless, state law does require that cities and counties develop a streamlined permitting process, limit their review to health and safety impacts, are not allowed to require a conditional use permit or any use permit if charging is the primary use of the site. And then it also sets time limits for when agencies have to approve these permits by. And I'll tell you right now, it's less than 2 months. It's a very quick turnaround process, which when you're talking to cities who are not familiar with this, it's a bit of a shock, and it takes some time for them to digest that. So this all sounds fantastic. And the problem that we've run into is there's no, the legislation doesn't really have any enforcement mechanism. And jurisdictions have told us in the past that a use permit would be required, and it's taken about a year to get through that process. And so this often comes up in some form around truck parking, where you plug in your truck on Friday night and pick it up on Monday. And if the truck's only charging for 6 hours, it's ready by midnight on Saturday morning. And the rest of that is truck parking. And if truck parking isn't allowed within, say, the M1 zone, you've got a problem there. So that's a very strict interpretation of the zoning code. And I think we're really going to need to address that in the future if we have any hope of meeting our zero emission infrastructure goals. Again, if I could wave a magic wand, it would be to have every jurisdiction familiar with this legislation and be ready to implement it. So on this next slide here, this is my last one. Forum mobility would not exist with these programs. So developing charging stations is a very complicated process fraught with financial nightmares and roadblocks. But thankfully, state, regional, local agencies have done a lot to help with grants, incentives, programs to facilitate charger station development. So on the left here, we've got SoCal Edison's Charge Ready program. Utilities like SoCal Edison, PG&E, LADWP have make-ready programs that provide either charger rebates, subsidies, or programs to facilitate charger station development, and also line extensions, or kind of a mix of all of these. And these programs are really, really important because they address the most expensive part of the development process. And I can tell you, looking at our projects today, we would not be here without these programs. And then also of enormous importance is programs like the CEC Energize program, CARB's Low Carbon Fuel Standard program, and the state HVIP program. We take advantage of these programs on each and every one of our projects. And, we really hope that agencies will see how well received these are and extend these programs into the future and continue to explore new ways to come up with programs that speak to this kind of same problem here. And so with that, I've I've covered a lot in a short amount of time. I'm sure there's questions. My contact information is below. And I truly encourage you guys to reach out to me. I could do this all day. I can talk about charging stations all day. So please, feel free to reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn, and hope to continue to be part of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Really appreciate that presentation and showing us how foreign mobility is helping move this really challenging issue, moving it forward. So thank you again. There is one question within the chat. I think this is directed for you. James is asking if Port Waimi up in Ventura is considered part of your SoCal strategy or in your region.
It's something that we've definitely looked at in the past, but at least right now, I wouldn't say that it's on our immediate radar. When we're talking about installing 100 charging stations at one location, we're talking about like 10-20% of the current market share of electric vehicles, and we definitely see that the ports of LA and Long Beach are going to be where the majority of those are going to be at the onset. And so installing 100 charging stations, which is kind of our business model, 50 to 100, doesn't quite pencil out in those areas right now. But, I think it's only a matter of time before we start moving into that geography.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, we'll give it a few more minutes. If there's any other questions, feel free to raise your hand and then come off of mute. We are about to start our engagement portion of the TAC presentation. So there will be some poll questions that are specific to siting criteria, the development of it, and any potential weights. We'll discuss more. So without seeing any other questions in the chat, I'm going to transition this over to Lars to start the engagement portion of the meeting. Thank you so much, Lars.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Patrick and Tony. Appreciate those presentations very much. So here's another chance to hear from our TAC members. Really, the remainder of our time together is to hear more from our TAC members. And we're going to begin with a poll question that actually references an earlier presentation. So let me engage this poll for us. All right. All right, so our first question, have you or your agency developed formal siting criteria or provided direct recommendations on siting criteria for EV charging facilities? Please let us know, yes, no, or not sure. Hey, I'm not seeing results coming in quite yet. Sam, would you confirm that the poll is working properly?
The poll, I believe, is working properly. Just submitted one just in case. Make sure it is.
Very good.
Are any speakers having are any TAC members having an issue with the poll? Let us know. You can either raise your hand or come off mute if you are having any challenges with answering the poll question.
All right, again, for reasons unknown, I'm seeing no responses yet. Perhaps a backup would be to place answers in the chat. That would just be a plan B. All right, well, given that this is a yes, no, or not sure question, I figured at this point people will have already chimed in. We've offered over a minute for this. So I'll end the poll and see if it produces results. Okay, it has not produced results, I'm afraid to say, again, for reasons inexplicable to me. So I'll share results, but they will reveal no responses. Again, I don't know the reason.
Lars, I can see the results on my screen now. So it was 35% yes, 12% no, and 53% not sure.
Thank you, Sam. Yes, I was just about to say the same thing.
Thank you very much. For some reason, I'm not getting that same data, but I'm very happy that you are. So terrific. Okay, I'll stop sharing that. And so based on that question, let's move to give you an opportunity to elaborate on this question. So in your experience, what have been the most significant challenges in identifying suitable sites for charging and hydrogen fueling stations? And are there successful strategies that you've observed in navigating these challenges?
Again, this one's open to all TAC members. If you have any input on this one, please raise your hand. We'll have you come off mute and talk a little bit about your experience and give us some of your insights on how you identified suitable charging or how you contributed to that. That'd be wonderful information to have on our side.
Okay, we have a hand. Leela Rao has a comment or a question.
Yeah, I guess I can pipe in. So I'm from the Port of Long Beach. So we developed a charging and fueling study in which we developed siting criteria. And I guess in terms of challenges, for the port at least, a lot of our land, needs to be utilized for specific purposes related to the movement of goods through the ports. And so while, having charging infrastructure is somewhat related to that, obviously there's a lot of challenges to make sure that we're utilizing the land for the best purpose possible. So we had to work a lot with our real estate teams and business development teams and sort of really across the organization in order to kind of vet the potential sites and determine how the use would potentially also could change over time, right? Because what's potentially available today and looks like it might be good for charging, could be potentially used for a different purpose down the road. And so there was really sort of a lot that went into determining sort of how to determine sort of what would be suitable for charging versus suitable for other uses within the port operations. And so we did identify quite a few sites in the end, but that was definitely probably one of the biggest challenges.
Terrific. Thank you very much for that. So we have a comment in the chat from Steve Smith, who answers, coordinating timing of site identification and acquisition with grant funding timelines. That challenge.
And I know we have a couple of people who have successfully worked on trying to get one of these sites developed. Is there any comments on kind of that challenge and how you successfully navigated that coordination of site timing, identification, and acquisition using grants? I know, Patrick, you talked about it a little bit and how you utilize grants to purchase or procure product, potentially land as well. And Tony, I don't know if you had any insight into that and how TA already has their own sites already, but maybe the transition of them to EV sites. And Sam, if you have any comments on that as well, please feel free to respond.
Well, I just want to quickly say on the hydrogen, and despite the fact that it's I don't know how long it's been, we've had Shell installed a hydrogen fueling station at our Petro location across the street from our other Ontario site. But just to know, when you talk about I'd be really curious, was it Leela who was describing the Port of Long Beach experience, but it seems that I'd love to hear more like later when we have time, but safety, right? You know, because the amount of space that you need around, you know, safe distances and just restriction zones, you know, when you're storing that much hydrogen fuel, is critical. And then, you know, if you're going to cite a, you know, major electrical sparky things, you know, next to that as well, right? So just that, I would think that's a general concern, right? It's just safety, and then the kind of follow on just distances needed.
I'm happy to share my experience as well. Good morning, everyone. Salam Yusuf Sada, CEO of Wadi V. We've been building out truck charging stations all across Southern California, as well as moving freight using zero emissions trucks through a truck as a service solution. We have a station online in Long Beach that's 1.5 acres in size, 5 megawatts of power, ability to charge 26 trucks concurrently. And then also have 3 sites coming online in the next 3 months in San Bernardino, Gardena, and Bakersfield. Yeah, I mean, every time we come across a site, there's a number of criteria we go through every time, right? What's the cost of the site to us? There's going to be sites that you come across that are perfect, but they're expensive and they make more money if they're an industrial park rather than being a charging station. So the economics of it definitely comes into play. Accessibility, whether it's close to customers, on and off major highway on-ramps, on-ramps and off-ramps, the access to power, grants, and the customer base. So all of these different criteria come into play every time we come across a site, and they go forward in parallel each time, right? So we don't just come across a site and say, okay, let's start this and go for it. And then when it comes to the actual build out of it, we try to plan for the future, always try to plan for, you know, as the demand increases. So Long Beach, it has 5 megawatts of power right now, but we are planning a second phase of an additional 7 megawatts that has both CCS and MCS charging dispensers. We've created our own charging subsidiary called Charge America that develops EVSE equipment. So this is the technology that's going to be installed in all of our future sites that caters to both CCS and MCS, and that way you future-proof your sites. And then we are working on later technology that gets rid of some of those issues that, you know, the forum had brought up on transformers and switchgear, where if you come in at medium voltage, you don't need any of that additional equipment. You just go straight to the dispensers. But yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of challenges that we face getting the site online in Long Beach. It took us 14 months to get that operational, which is pretty quick. You're not always going to see that in some other locations. It may take longer depending on how much power is available or the challenges you face in permitting and other issues. But yeah, I mean, happy to answer any other questions.
Also, just piggybacking on what Salim was also saying, I mean, in one of our work with the Los Angeles County, one of the things that we realized, I mean, as we were doing a similar type of study there, was really the availability of the real estate and lands, I mean, to build out the charging infrastructure, not today, but looking out into the future. So, I mean, Ben Wang helped with the AB 2127 report. And if you look into that report and looking into the number of like charging infrastructure needed for medium and heavy duty vehicles across California, it's a lot more than, I mean, than diesel stations or what you're probably going to expect from the hydrogen station. So, I mean, soon, probably in the next, probably 5 to 10 years, we're going to be running into that real estate issues and availability of those lands. So thinking about like how, I mean, local governments, I mean, can start thinking about like land banking strategies and thinking about like making some of these lands and publicly owned lands available for charging infrastructure would be helpful.
Thank you so much, Sam. And I think that's actually a great transition to our next poll question. Lars, if you want to move to the next slide.
Sure, absolutely.
We heard a number of different challenges and different siting criteria that you think are important. The next question is going to be talking about what do you think is the most important element? We heard about grid capacity, land availability, the costs. So we'd love to hear from you about what you believe is the most important element out of all of these to think about while we're creating our criteria and while we're thinking through how to develop that and utilize that as we move forward in this project process. So as last time, please select one and we'll provide out the results.
Okay, we have supplied about 45 seconds to answer this question, and we're in the same situation as before, where I am unable to see the rate of response. I'll give everyone another 10 seconds, and then I'll share results. And Sam, if you wouldn't mind confirming again that we have results. Okay, here we are. Let's end the poll. And results.
Yeah, I can see the results. I mean, the top rank ones, 43% of the results were grid capacity, 29% land, equity and utilization were both equal at 14%, and no one voted for environmental.
Come on, people from California, come on. No environmental?
To be fair, environmental criteria is more around the CEQA and NEPA. I mean, the most critical piece of it is really the CEQA and NEPA, and maybe the use of brownfields and others. But I mean, we've heard, and I think permitting is a big hurdle. And in some cases, like with some of the government funded projects, CEQA and NEPA we've heard also has been a big hurdle too. But
Hey, I'm also curious from the TAC, there is a time horizon to this. We didn't quite, it's difficult to measure it from a siting criteria because things change over time. How crucial is it to start thinking about time horizons as you do this? I'm just curious, in addition to the questions that Lars may have, as you think about that, if there is something that you want to weigh in there that's helpful for us to think about.
And Lars, if you wouldn't mind moving to the further questions. So I know we have limited time coming up here, but please, if you do have any opportunities to think through this while you see them on the screen in terms of specific stakeholders that we should be engaging as we think through siting criteria, and then thinking about beyond siting criteria, as we've discussed, there's other criteria that we believe we should be considering. I think Anurag touched on one of them, which is time and timelines. So if you think of anything else, please add that in here. That would be great. Additionally, and I'll have Jonathan talk about this a little bit more, we are going to have a homework assignment for the TAC. And this one will be a very short survey, but we'll be specifically talking about siting criteria and potentially the weights we want to be assigning or the priority to those siting criteria. And so what we'll be doing is sending out a short survey to the TAC membership between now and our next TAC meeting for you guys to answer that. And I'll, again, leave this open for any conversation. So if you do have any questions or comments that you'd like to make right now about the siting criteria, please do. Please use the raise hand function and we'll take you off mute and allow you to talk about the subject, because I think it's a really important one to understand the priorities of our community and who should be involved in those conversations as we continue to move this forward.
I think there was one on the permitting that could be added. I mean, you had an environmental in the poll, but permitting can take some time as well. I know that there is a permitting rule for passenger vehicles where if it's a site that's under 2 megawatts, California has, I think, 120 days to get that site aligned and have power available, but that doesn't exist for medium and heavy duty fleet sizes that require significantly more power. So that's also a big point. And I mean, as mentioned, it can take a while, right? San Bernardino, that's been in construction for about 2 years. And part of that has been because of the permitting.
Thank you so much, Salim.
Salim, maybe a follow-up question to that. Do you think permitting process for different sites could be different time frame? Like, is there a site that might be at an advantage versus another site with respect to permitting? Or it's like, well, I mean,
Yeah,
within a certain municipality, you're gonna deal with the same type of issues.
every county has its own requirements. I mean, Bakersfield, and also the sites, right? Bakersfield, for instance, was a completely greenfield site. We had the CEQA exemption by right, fortunately, otherwise that would have been longer, but permitting took longer because there was more work to do. It needed grading, paving, all sorts of things to go on, whereas in Long Beach, the site was already mostly paved, so all we had to do was mostly electrical work and trenching and so forth. And then also in areas that you have battery storage, you're going to run into a lot more permitting issues, right? So Kern County, for instance, where our Bakersfield site is, the county has tremendous amount of permitting requirements for putting battery storage in.
Thank you so much, Salim. That's some really good context to understanding how timelines and permitting can really have an impact on how these get constructed and how quickly they get constructed. Again, I'm just going to do a quick time check. We're about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to move this again to the next steps. Jonathan, if you'd be able to talk us through what the next steps are moving this project forward.
Yeah, if we could jump to the next slide after this, please. Yeah, so right now we're working through the heavy load analysis. I think it's a pretty new and interesting process. I'm definitely learning a lot. So we'll have these future year demand forecasts by hopefully the end of the year, like Anurag mentioned, maybe moving a little bit into January, but we'll get that framework finalized and be able to share that with you all at the next TAC meeting. I think based on some of the input here as well, we're going to develop more, we'll further refine the siting criteria and for both EV and hydrogen stations. Again, that will be shared when that's ready to go. And we'll start developing those typologies. Again, I want to emphasize that we're not going to select specific sites that are, must be developed for, refueling. This is really about just providing a real world example with, sort of a certain mix of the criteria that apply to that site. And then we're also going to send out a survey to the TAC members. We want to understand what elements and subcomponents of the siting criteria are critical to you versus less important. So in helping us develop those weights for the different criteria, we're gonna reach out to you and hope we can get a lot of good feedback and input. So we'll be sending that survey out relatively soon. We don't have an exact date, but please keep an eye on your inboxes and we'll be getting that out to you in the next couple of months. Next. Oh, I see Ian's got his hand raised. Sorry.
Hi, quick question on the model. You said that you're targeting January. Is that I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding the right things here. So there's the tool that was shown earlier where you had sort of that screenshot of Moreno Valley of showing sort of, heat map or, that kind of modeling result. Is that the model that you're talking about, that would potentially be available in January? And would that be available publicly, just to the TAC, just internally for yourselves, or is it something completely different that you're talking about?
Go ahead, Anurag.
The outputs will be certainly available. We are working with Jonathan to figure out the format in which they need to be made available, both to SCAG as well as the TAC. So give us a couple more weeks to figure that out. And to answer your first question, it is the full model results for the horizon year. So we'll spend the next couple of weeks, as we said. Wanshi from LBNL is here as well, I think. So we're working collaboratively to figure out what the outputs need to be and what the scenarios need to be. And then we'll start producing those results. We might need a little bit more time before it's released even to the TAC, because we want to make sure that the results look reasonable. So maybe the first time you'll see it is actually at the next TAC or just before the next TAC. And then we can certainly discuss after the TAC, after TAC number 4, how and where it will be shared.
Part of the reason that I ask is I'm not sure if this will be useful or not, but I know there's a whole variety of different grant funding applications that are going to be due in the spring. And so there's a lot of conversation happening with various agencies, some people here on this call as well, about, how do we think about charging infrastructure associated with the various, grant funding like climate pollution reduction grants or clean ports or whatever else is out there from federal funding. That's all very timely. And so I'm just trying to think if this kind of tool or kind of results would potentially be helpful in some of those applications. I think it potentially could be. It's a little bit hard to tell until, we have a better sense of it, but I'm just trying to see that timing of that January for some results, I think probably would be helpful, because I think a lot of these things are going to start being due, early spring. So just a thought.
I appreciate that context, Ian. I think that's good timeline for us to work towards. Sorry if I spoke over somebody, I apologize.
Yeah, this is Wanshi from LBL. So we are currently actively developing the models, and hopefully we should be getting some preliminary results by January for you guys.
And I just want to add for the group that, while we do want to make sure that this is information that's, really supporting everyone and helping, what we don't want to do is, rush anything out. Anurag said we want to make sure the results are, sort of valid and reasonable. So we're definitely going to take our time to make sure that it's something that we know, the TAC members, member jurisdictions, and SCAG can rely on. A lot of this is about a really consistent framework that the region can use to, sort of solve some of the questions around charging. Because, we're not just one city surrounded by open space. We've got a multiplicity of sort of hubs of activity that serve different aspects of logistics and goods movement. And so we're really trying to make sure we take a comprehensive look at all of that. This is, one set of framework, and it's going to help some of these, it'll help local jurisdictions decide which components in citing these locations is important to them. Right, we talked about how you can set different sort of levels of importance in the tool that Theodora showed. So we don't want to make sure everything is well developed and reliable before we send things out. So if we can do it by January, like you said, that would be great. Because there's a lot of funding coming out of the pipeline, but we're definitely going to have a thorough review process as well to make sure that we're not handing out something that is inconsistent with our final report if we make a change down the line.
And I also urge the TAC, if you're aware of these grant programs or if you need some help, I think SCAG is there to coordinate these discussions. And so if we need to, even before the full release, if there is a specific need, I think we can figure out between SCAG and this project team what we can make available and how. So this is, please don't treat just the full release as the only opportunity for collaboration. There may be other things which we can do on the side to help you get to grants.
Anurag, this is Annie. I just wanted to reiterate your point there. I think for some of our partner agencies, we have been having larger discussions about various regional or various funding opportunities for the region. I do think that the work done to date or hopefully to be completed in time can potentially be pretty useful for something like CPRG. And so I realize timing is a constraint here, but I think maybe offline we can have further conversations of what we might be able to pull to be able to help some of our partner agencies.
Thanks, Annie.
Great. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be here today. I see folks are dropping off. If you want more information, here's our website. You can reach out to any of us. Our contact information was on the last slide. And we'll be sharing minutes, the presentation, the recording, and all of that shortly on the website. So keep an eye out for that. We'll also, mail any collateral we have to you as well if you were on the invite list. So thanks again, and appreciate everyone's support on this project.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye.
So much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.